Hi, I just wanted to talk a little bit about doing in-text documentation or citations in MLA style. So for those of you who did your textual analysis essay on a speech rather than a commercial, you've had a little practice with doing some of this stuff already. For those of you who did a commercial, most of you did not do much quoting or really any citing, and that's okay. But the reality is for this upcoming report essay, everybody's going to have to get used to doing this in-text documentation. The biggest thing that I saw, it seemed like people were struggling with doing the in-text documentation in the textual analysis essay. And it mostly came down to being inconsistent about citing and incorporating quotations. So in other words, sometimes people would do it correctly some of the time, and then other times they'd do something different. So it's really important to try to just be consistent across the board and always do those citations appropriately. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about why you have to do this. What you're going to see further down in the learning activity is stuff about doing works cited pages. And I'm going to talk a little bit in a different video specifically about that aspect of your paper. But the idea is that when you provide in-text citations in your paper, they're meant to match with your works cited page, right? So a lot of times people say, well, isn't it okay if I just do the in-text citations? I don't have to list it on a works cited page also, right? No, you have to do both. Like I said, because they match. So we're going to kind of do just a little practice using an article that I found here. So this is, let's say I was doing a report about immigration in some way, right? So I found this article through the library databases. It's called The Movement to Decriminalize Border Crossing, where this writer is talking about how some people are arguing that border crossing should not be an illegal thing. So the thing is, if I am citing information from this article, it's meant to match up with what I have on the works cited page so that if somebody wanted to, they could go and find this article and find the exact place where I'm getting the information from. So I know that doing all of this stuff can really seem like a pain. It is. But maybe the thing to keep in mind that makes it seem less annoying is just the fact that this is a way to protect yourself, ultimately. If you ever get in trouble, somebody questioning whether you're plagiarizing or something like that, if you provide this information, both in-text citations and a works cited page, and can prove where your information came from and that you weren't just plagiarizing it, then this can really help you out. So again, it can be kind of an annoying thing, but ultimately it's there as protection for you. So what you have to think about is when you're doing in-text documentation, you're labeling each of these quotations or paraphrases or summaries that you're using so that the audience can figure out which of these articles you're referring to. In the textual analysis, it probably wasn't as big of a deal if you were missing a citation because I could tell what text you were referring to because you were only working with one. But imagine how confusing it is for an audience when you're including a quote and you're just putting a page number, for example. If you're using 10 sources in your paper and you just have, that it's on page 35, the audience isn't going to know which of those articles that it comes from, right? So it's about being clear in that labeling and being consistent about it, right? So again, using this article that I pulled up, let's say that I wanted to use a quotation from it in my paper. Again, we can see here that it's from this author, Ingrid V. Eagly. So I had found just a sample quotation that I might want to use here, right? So this quote seemed kind of interesting and important. You know, if I were doing a report on immigration, I might want to incorporate this into my paper. It says, scholars have similarly warned of the overcriminalization of migrants, the subordination and radicalization of immigrant groups caused by criminalization, and the questionable effectiveness and considerable expense of border prosecution. So again, this article is just pointing out that a lot of people are against the idea of throwing immigrants into a holding facility, right? So you'll see that this is a PDF. So this is exactly the way that the article looks in the original journal that it was published in. Again, I can see here on the left, it comes from the Boston College Law Review. And like any good scholarly or academic article, it looks pretty boring, right? No pictures, lots of sophisticated language. We have lots of footnotes here citing where all this information comes from. And this is, from a pretty long publication here. So this is on page 1971. And you can see here, this is a 63-page long article, right? Again, I'm not expecting you to find any sort of sources that are that long and specialized, right? But this is just an example. So anything that I cite from this, I'm going to be needing the page number. That's probably the most important piece of information that you want to include in your in-text citations so that, theoretically, your audience could go find this exact quote that we're going to use here, right? So I just pulled up a sample Microsoft Word document and make sure that it's in the right font here. So how you cite this, remember, depends on how you set up the quote, what your signal phrase looks like, right? So I'll show you a couple different versions of how you might cite this quotation. So let me go back up here. I think the author's name is Eagly. Yes, Eagly. Let me go back to the quote. Yeah. So let's say I'm trying to set up this quote right here about scholars have similarly warned. One way I could do it is to use a signal phrase that uses the author's name. So maybe I'd say something like Ingrid V. Eagly explains. I think it's something like scholars have warned. Again, I want to double check myself because you want to make sure it's, see, I was wrong. Have similarly warned, right? It's very good to always double check so that you're not accidentally plagiarizing. So I'm not going to include this whole quote here because what I really want to show you right now is the citation, right? So let's say I include the whole quote, right? Now I have to cite it, show where this is in the original text. Since I used this writer's name here in the signal phrase, that means all I need in my in-text citation is going to be the page number that it comes from, right? So this is on page 1971. Notice that my period will come after the citation, and I'm good to go, right? Remember that if you happen to find a source that does not have page numbers, and realistically probably if it's a scholarly article, it probably will have page numbers, but if not, you would use the paragraph number, PAR, period, and then whatever the paragraph number is, right? So let's say I've set this up a little bit differently. Something where I'm not using the author's name in that signal phrase, right? Maybe I'd say something like, one article explains, give the quote, scholars have similarly warned, give the whole thing. So now, since I haven't used that author's name in the signal phrase here, I need to include it in the citation because again, if somebody reads this, they're going to say, okay, this comes from some article, it's on page 1971, but But if you don't attach or label the author to it, then that reader's not going to know where to find this, right? So now I want to put Eagly in the citation, 1971. It'll look like that. So the idea is that you're putting the name either before the quote or after the quote, always, but not both, right? So if I have Eagly here, I don't need to put the name in that citation. It ends up being redundant. Don't need to do that, right? So again, the biggest reason why you do this is so that when someone's reading your essay, they're going to say, okay, this comes from some article by somebody named Eagly. Where can I find more information about that? So whatever you have here in the citation or in the signal phrase, that audience is going to look then on your Works Cited page. What they're looking for is Eagly, right? So somewhere on your Works Cited page, they're going to see some source by someone named Eagly, and it's going to give them more information where they can go find this article if they really wanted to, right? And again, we're going to talk about Works Cited pages in a later video here. But again, this gives the title, the journal that it comes from, and probably most importantly, the URL where they could actually go and access it, right? This gives the full page numbers of the article. And the idea, again, if we go back to my sample here, now they're going to know, oh, it's on page 1971 of this source, and they can go find it, right? So most of the time, if you're using academic sorts of articles, you are going to have an author listed, right? Sometimes, especially if you happen to be using just, a general website article or something like that, you may not have an author listed. Again, that's possible, and it's kind of a sign that it's not such a scholarly article, but again, maybe that's going to happen. So what you could do then is use a shortened version of the title, especially in your citations. Let's go back. Let's see what the full title of this is. It's called The Movement to Decriminalize Border Crossing. So again, I could do this in one of two ways. I could do something like in an article called The Movement to Decriminalize Border Crossing. Again, I want to make sure I include quotation marks around the title of the article here. It explains. Then I could give my quotation here. And then I just have to use the page number, right? So it'll look like that. The other way that you could do it is to use a shortened version of the article title in your citation. So again, if I did, I'm just going to go up here. One article explains blah, 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 blah. I will use the first important word of the article title. So if the article starts with a, an, or the, leave that out and go to the next important word. Because again, probably a lot of articles are going to start with, a, an, or the. I'll put a shortened version, of the article title here. So movement, right? So again, if a reader's looking at this, they'll say, okay, this is from some article. It has movement in the title. Remember, what they're looking for is something that matches this on the Works Cited page. So again, let's say I did not have this author's name here, right? Let's say it didn't have an author. I would be starting this entry with the title, which would be The Movement. Then the audience would know, oh, this is the article that we're talking about here, right? So again, we're going to talk about Works Cited pages in a little bit here, but that citing in text is really important, and it's the best way to kind of protect yourself against plagiarism.